Hello. Okay, so what the fuck is a tank even? We keep seeing all these articles about armored vehicles being sent over to Ukraine and being purchased and developed across the world. But if you were to call this a tank, keyboard warriors like myself are going to tell you just how wrong you are. Because it's not, okay? It's not a tank. Now, when you think of a tank, you probably think of bulking armor, big gun on top, and tracks, right? Wrong, because this isn't a tank. That was a trick. Neither is this, or this. Okay, but it doesn't really matter, right? Why should I or you or anyone really not directly involved in fighting care about the difference between an IFV, an MBT, an ABV, or all the other three-letter acronyms we can think about to classify things? We all have other things to worry about, right? Like tax season and paying your pizza in installments over a series of months. See, I'm here to argue that it is important to know that, and about just things in general. This concept is a broad one that can be applied to many things. But by definition, I guess I'm saying that here, words mean things. But specifically in this context, the words we use and that we choose that rhymed are what matter when we find ourselves unfortunate enough to be engaged in the conversation with another human being. See, what sparked my thought process on this was this particular tweet. And it says, according to official jargon, this object in the US military arsenal is also not a tank because something. Hence, official military jargon isn't about describing things for maximum clarity. It's about obscuring things in a web of useless faux insider lingo. And while I love a good discussion on federal government manipulating epistemology for their own means as much as the next guy, I don't really think that's what's going on here. And this is the picture in question. Also, let it be known, I've been calling Paladins not tanks for years now, even in the thumbnail. What can I say? I'm a man ahead of my time. So for those of you not in the know, a Paladin is a self-propelled artillery gun, meaning it shoots at targets with indirect fire from miles away. And the armor is really only there to protect from counter battery fire and small arms, just enough protection to run away, essentially. Yeah, I'll give it to him though. It looks like a tank. It's got big armor, it's got tracks, big gun on top that goes bang. But then he also points to a Bradley. You know, same thing, armor, big spinny gun, tracks. Might as well be tanks, right? Still no. Now, I'm not here to go into depth about what makes a tank and what doesn't make a tank, but just know essentially it means you have a large bore cannon on an armored tracked chassis. Doesn't carry additional dismounts in the back and uses a direct fire weapon system, mostly used to break through enemy lines or destroy other vehicles. And that's what makes this a tank, this an infantry fighting vehicle, this a self-propelled gun, and I don't know what this is. But why does it matter that tanks have such specific definitions? See, the military answer is that ground commanders need to know how to effectively utilize the capabilities of a tank to its maximum effectiveness and not put in situations that it won't propel, and making sure you can plan for it effectively according with logistics and blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Still talking to a civilian population. Why should they care? Maybe because world governments are sending them by the baker's dozen overseas. Governments that you fall under are sending equipment that you paid for with your tax dollars to go fight in a war. Believe it or not, you have an inherent vetted interest in what your federal government decides to do or not do. If you're to have an informed opinion on whether you agree with how the international community is responding and material supporting the war in Ukraine, you need to know why sending a bunch of Bolt Bradleys from the 80s is kind of a big deal, but why sending Abrams is a really big deal. I'm not saying you need to spend the next 2 weeks reading technical manuals so you know how to check for the lead ties on the M2A3 Halon fire suppression system are in the right location, or be able to fix a thrown track under night vision under 30 minutes, but you should probably know that a buildup of modern Western tanks, not IFVs, not artillery pieces or air defense systems, means that Ukraine is building up for a large push, and Russia in response has done the same, and that spring operations will likely set the course for how the rest of the war will go, and by extension, the entire international situation in Eastern Europe, and by extension again, how the United States postures its military across Europe, and whether or not we fully shift towards countering China's military expansion, or if we have to intensify our efforts in Europe. So you might not care that this is a tank and that's not a tank, but you might care all of a sudden when oil embargoes make it way more expensive for you to fill up your gas tank, or if the price of your new iPhone goes up by a factor of 10 because we can no longer get semiconductors from Taiwan because Xi Jinping decided to get a little froggy in his spare time. Slippery slope fallacies aside, it's still important that we educate ourselves on the nuances of situations going on around us. It's not the best idea to just wander through life with this level of intellectual laziness. Unfortunately, though, we live in a time where everything is happening all the time, and we're expected to have a solid, well thought out opinion instantaneously. Essentially just reading a headline and instantly we're supposed to have the answers, but those answers are usually just rooted in our reaction to reading a headline. We all know how headlines have been recently, and those reactions that we have without actually going into the nuance of the problem are supposed to be defended to the death, essentially, because heaven forbid we change our mind on something and admit that we were wrong every now and then, especially when presented with valid new information. See, the tweet I referenced had a long thread with the person just getting angry that people were trying to correct him, regardless of how polite and informed the person correcting him was. Faults in our opinion are seen as attacks on us as people, which is some strange doublethink, because most people will agree that not everyone knows everything, but for some reason it's so hard for us to admit when we ourselves are wrong. A lot of it boils down to just intellectual humility. We need to be open to being corrected sometimes. I get corrected all the time. I would much rather be corrected rather than just be arrogantly wrong about things that I think about. That said, I think there's also another level to this as to why this might be a harder concept for people to grasp, because it wouldn't be a video of mine without bringing in some kind of overthinking philosophical concept, right? Now, to help explain this, I'm going to bring in the concept of the hermeneutic circle, which is a concept created by German philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey. And while his creation of this was a way to interpret, reconcile the fact that we all have different world opinions through the study of cultural texts, I'm going to bastardize it and explain why some armored vehicles go boom and others just go pew pew sometimes. The hermeneutic circle essentially says you have large concepts made up of smaller pieces, but the two are inseparable, meaning you can only understand the bigger concept if you look at the smaller parts that make it up, but you can't understand those smaller objects without understanding how they fit in the larger picture, which you can't understand unless you know the smaller bits, and bada bing, we have a circle. Amazing. This could also be represented as this fun little loop-de-doop pattern, which I think is just neato. Here, our big picture is going to be armored combats, and the smaller bits that make it up are going to be the vehicles themselves. So if you're just some Twitter rando trying to see how the Paladin fits in the bigger picture of armored warfare, you might start out by reading a few articles on the Paladin itself, learning its capabilities, maybe some of the logistical stuff behind it, but then you have to integrate it into the bigger picture, because Paladins don't exist in a vacuum yet. But knowing the stuff about the Paladin is that first piece of the puzzle that kind of gets you a little closer to knowing the whole concept of the bigger picture. So if our Twitter hero here had decided to read just like a single article that would have involved like maybe one Google search, he could have educated himself on the Paladin essentially. Then once he has the Paladin, he has that one piece of the pie that is the bigger picture, and then looking at the bigger picture, identifying the holes, which would be the other vehicles, and then maybe through, I don't know, like 3 or 4 more Google searches, he could have read more articles and more things that would describe what's going on, gaining more pieces of the puzzle that are the bigger picture. And then eventually, doing the little loop-de-loop thing, he would have gotten a little closer and a little closer, and maybe eventually had a pretty good understanding of armored warfare, and therefore a much better understanding of why we're sending stuff over there and the numbers that we are. Not that I would know anything about armored warfare though. Anyway, continue the conversation in the comments like you guys normally do. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.